Hello, everybody. Okay, so this is another video I'm making to tell you how to have your teams work better. And one of the problems that sometimes shows up in teams is people not speaking up at meetings. Now, I don't mean the meetings are completely silent. What I mean is there's an elephant in the room and nobody says anything about it. Somebody has a question, wondering about something that, like, what's the point of what we're doing? Or what if this goes wrong or that goes wrong? And they just don't say anything. So here's the question: why does that happen? And Amy Edmondson is a psychologist who studied this, and she says what she found is that it was a lack of psychological safety. And psychological safety means that you don't know if you're not feeling psychologically safe, you don't know how you're going to be treated if you do something or say something that other people don't like. Are you going to be humiliated or not? Will you be safe within the group? And so that's what's happening with lack of psychological safety. And she says there's basically four things that people are trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid looking ignorant, looking stupid, incompetent, intrusive, or negative. So nobody says, hey, I want everyone to think I'm dumb, I don't know what I'm doing, or that I'm intruding on things, asking questions about things that I shouldn't be asking. And so it's really easy to avoid these four things. One of the things she talks about is the research shows that we are involved in impression management. We want to avoid the appearance of negative traits, and this gets in the way. So, for example, if you want to avoid looking stupid or looking ignorant, just don't ask any questions. So don't ask, what's the point of this project? Because maybe you think, oh, I should already know that, and so I'm not going to ask. I'll just kind of go along with it. Or you don't want to look incompetent, so you don't admit errors and mistakes, or you don't admit any weaknesses. You don't admit that maybe there's things you can't see or that you don't know about. You don't want to be intrusive, to don't offer any ideas, because you might step on something on territory that somebody else doesn't like, and you don't know how they're going to treat you, so you just don't offer any ideas. And the other is, to avoid being negative, you just don't critique the status quo. You don't say, hey, you know what? It's kind of terrible that we have to meet in this room. It's noisy, or it's too cold, or whatever. Or they're piling too many responsibilities off on us, etc. Those might be important issues to address that might actually allow your project to work out better. But if you don't want to appear negative, you won't critique the status quo. You'll just go along with it. All right. And an example here is just, which is one I've kind of already mentioned, is, with something as simple as what's our goal. I heard a really interesting anecdote about a consultant that was brought in to a meeting, and the consultant was very willing to appear to be ignorant and stupid. And so she had said, hey, I noticed there's no line item budget for the new project for marketing. And and she thought maybe they had already, maybe there's a reason why it wasn't there, but she decided to ask. And the marketing guy said, oh, yeah, I didn't think you guys were going to do any marketing for this. So it turned out that it was really important to ask that question, and nobody else was asking this question. So it's very important to ask even the dumbest of dumb questions, because you just never know what it is. But of course, if people don't feel safe, they don't do it. So the question is, how do we help people feel safe? How do we make them feel safe? And that's where we come in with the matrix. I'm going to show you how to do it. And the cool thing about the matrix is we can start out and we have a process that will allow people to feel safe and to realize that every single person in the room is imperfect. And so the first thing we do is we ask people, who is important to you? So you actually have your whole team with this matrix up on a whiteboard, and you say, well, who is important to you? And people are going to say their parents, their children, their their significant others. Wife. I'm just going to put wife, husband, etc. All right. So people are going to do that. Sometimes they'll even mention, their pets, dog, cat. All right. But they'll say that, and everyone in the room, of course, can see. Yeah, we all have people who are important to us. Sometimes people will even mention customers and even vendors. Okay, they will sometimes come up in there, and that's fine if that comes up. It doesn't really matter. In fact, it's really great that as many things as come up as possible. But then you say, well, what shows up and gets in the way of moving toward who's important to us? And People will say, might not know what to say, so you always give them a few examples, and you'll say, oh, fear, anger, for example. And people will start putting in other things like frustration, feeling tired. All right. Sometimes we don't play with our kids if we're feeling really tired, for example. So people will start noticing, okay, there's stuff that shows up and gets in the way. And people are saying these things and they're noticing, yeah, we all have these things. And that's part of what allows people to feel safe, is when they realize that everybody's imperfect. So we're seeing that. Now, you go to, what do you do to move away from the inner stuff? And people, we say, well, walk, run, right? For fear, for anger, you might yell, speak with an edge in your voice, and people will start bringing this up. So you're bringing this up in the meeting. People will answer. These are really easy questions to answer. Everyone, and you accept every answer that people give, and everyone starts seeing, okay, yeah, we're seeing a more fuller picture of how we're imperfect humans. And then what do we do to move toward who is important to us? And we, our family members, we hug. Um, for your family, you might make food for them. Oops. Do fun things. People will mention more specific examples. Feeding your pets, sending thank you notes to customers and vendors. I don't know if you do that, but some people might. And by the way, it can be, what do you do? What do you do to move toward who is important, or what could you do? What do you do? I'll just add the could do part, or could do, because people will think of new ideas that they haven't thought of before. Like maybe they do think of sending thank you notes. And so this is the first loop. Everyone's starting to realize, okay, we're all humans, we're all imperfect, and they're also learning what these boxes are for. And then you take them through a second loop. Now I'm going to give you an example of a real group of people who went through this. And not as many. They had many, many more things on there than this, but we don't need it all. So we change it for the second loop. We say, what is your shared purpose? And so we start getting them to actually brainstorm a list of things, and then we want to eventually boil it down to one sentence. But this was from a group of teachers who were in training together, and they put their shared purpose, well, to become better teachers, to help our students grow, to manage our classrooms better. They had more than that, but that's the essence of what they had there. All right. Then what shows up and gets in the way? Anxiety, frustration, sadness, uncertainty. And you'll notice that some of these things are things that were on the first loop that we did on that first diagram. And you point that out when you take it through the group as well. Through it. Then what do we do to move away from the inner stuff? They procrastinate, not listening to students, yelling at students, not asking for support. Okay. And what they all see is we're all doing the same stuff that to move away from the inner stuff. And by the way, I always like to point out that, I usually do this on the first loop, but point out that sometimes we do stuff to move away from the inner stuff. Sometimes that stuff is really useful. If a car was about to hit you, it's producing some fear down here, but you're going to move out of the way. That's the right thing to do. You're not going to move towards it. You're going to move away from it. So sometimes away moves are fine. And, if people say like a headache shows up and gets in the way, well, they might take a Tylenol or an aspirin to move away from that. And that's perfectly a good thing, a very useful thing to do. All right. So now we get here. What do we do to move towards our shared purpose? Attending trainings, trying new strategies. Now, I've shown you this because I wanted to show it to you really quickly. But it was really useful if you actually answer these questions yourself, especially the questions from the first loop here, because you're by yourself. You can actually take the time to answer all these questions and go around it. And you'll notice a kind of a little switch in your perspective that tends to happen. And sometimes when I show this to people, they smile or they laugh. Sometimes they get really thoughtful, and they start noticing new connections. And that's very useful when that happens. So I really suggest you try that. Now this, if you're going to try this, you might want to try it with somebody you have some kind of relationship with, a friend or a family member, a significant other, just saying, hey, what's our shared purpose? I would take them through the first loop first, before doing that, but then you take them through another one and say, what's our shared purpose and what shows up and gets in the way, and all these questions. And one of the things you'll tend to find is it kind of brings you a little bit closer to that person, and you start to notice different things about that person that you hadn't before, and you start to notice new ideas, and a lot of new ideas tend to show up right here that you didn't see before, and which is very, very cool. So this is what we do. This is what I do to help teams feel safer with each other, and that safety tends to result in increased learning, because once people feel safe, they start sharing more things that they might not have shared before. sharing ideas, sharing questions, and some of the questions, of course, don't lead anywhere, and some of them do. But that's the point of psychological safety: is when you ask a question that's, quote, a dumb question, nobody laughs at you, nobody makes fun of you, no one says that, what's wrong with you. When you criticize the status quo, people listen to you. And one of the things that tends to happen in groups is people start putting things like here, like, you know, that are negative about how they've behaved towards their colleagues. And then when they start putting the antithesis over here. Oh, I should listen to my colleague when they complain. Things like, or I'll move toward, not a should, but a move toward would be to listen to them. So things like that start coming up, and they come up in a very non-judgmental atmosphere, and people start making these changes. Now, of course, there's more stuff to do with the group to build and continue to grow that psychological safety. But this is a really great starting point. It's something you can do yourself, even if only thing you've seen is this video. And of course, if you want help with this, you can always contact me. My contact information is underneath each video, just in case it changes, so it's underneath the videos. And you can always go to mentalflexibility.net in order to learn more. And that's all. So please try this today. At least try it with yourself so you can get that little aha that happens, and share it with at least one other person. All right. Bye-bye.